She had nothing but her body to offer, and the cowboy still let the frozen Apache woman in the snow fell hard that morning, thicker and heavier than it had in years. Each flake seemed to bite through the thin layers she wore, and the wind whipped her face until her cheeks burned. She stumbled along the frozen trail, her boots sinking into the snow, leaving shallow prints that quickly disappeared behind her. Her fingers were numb, her lips blue, and every breath was a struggle. Breath she had nowhere to go, and she knew it. The small town nearby was empty at this hour, and she could not risk walking into it. She had nothing to offer, nothing but herself, and she feared that would never be enough. Her legs ached, every step a battle against the cold and exhaustion. She had left the reservation early in the morning, hoping to escape before anyone noticed her absence. She did not have food or money, or even a coat thick enough to shield her from this biting winter. Her only possession was a small backpack, which now seemed meaningless against the storm raging around her. The world was white and silent, except for the crunch of her boots in the snow and the occasional howl of the wind across the hills. She had learned long ago that survival was not about courage, it was about endurance. Yet now, walking in this endless winter, endurance felt impossible. Her mind wandered back to the small cabin she had seen in the distance. A dark shape against the white. She had no idea whose it belonged to or if anyone lived there. Still, it was better than the cold that threatened to freeze her to the bone. When she reached the fence at the edge of the property, she paused to catch her breath. The wood was old, and some of the boards were loose. Beyond it, she could see the cabin, smoke curling from its chimney, promising warmth and safety. Her heart raced with both hope and fear. Because warmth meant survival. Fear because, in her experience, help often came at a cost. She had been taught by life that asking for help could be dangerous, that kindness was rare, and that most people expected something in return. She had nothing to give, nothing at all. The snowstorm was relentless now, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Her vision blurred with the snow and tears she tried not to shed. Each step toward the cabin felt heavier than the last. Her body was weak from hunger and fatigue, and her hands and feet were beginning to lose feeling. She slipped on the ice, her hands scraping against the frozen ground. A sharp pain shot through her palms, but she barely noticed. She could not stop now. She had to keep moving. That was when she saw him. At first, he was just a shadow behind the cabin, moving slowly through the snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in heavy clothing that seemed to belong more to the mountains than a town. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, a presence that demanded respect without needing to speak. The first instinct that gripped her was fear. What if he was unkind? What if he turned her away, like so many others had before? But as he approached the fence, he did something unexpected. He waved, not in a way that mocked her, not in a way that seemed threatening, but with a simple, steady hand, a gesture that said, "Come, you are safe here."
Her heart skipped a beat. Could she trust him?
Could someone really offer help without expecting anything in return? She hesitated, her eyes on him, measuring, questioning. Finally, the cold and the fear of being out here alone won. She climbed over the fence as best as she could, her body trembling from both cold and exhaustion. He did not rush to help, did not judge her for being unkempt, for being weak. Instead, he simply held the gate open, allowing her to step onto the path leading to the cabin. His eyes were steady, calm, and kind. That steadiness gave her a strange sense of relief, like finding an anchor in a stormy sea. As she drew closer to the cabin, she noticed the details, the thick smoke curling from the chimney, the wooden planks that were worn but solid, the light glowing warmly through the small windows. It was more than a building. It was a sanctuary in the middle of the harsh, unforgiving winter. She wanted to run to it, collapse inside, and never think about the world outside again. But her pride stopped her for a moment. I shouldn't, she whispered, almost to herself. She looked down at her worn boots, at her thin coat, at her empty hands. I have nothing, the man said. Nothing at first. He just tilted his head slightly, a question in his gaze, as if asking her to explain what she meant. I have nothing but myself, she said finally, her voice trembling. I don't have money, or food, or anything. I don't know why you would help me. Breath. He smiled faintly. Not a laugh, but a gentle, reassuring expression. It's winter, he said simply. It's cold out there. You need shelter. That's enough reason. Her eyes widened. No conditions, no demands. No suspicion, just a simple truth. She was in danger, and he was willing to help. The relief hit her like a wave, washing away the tension in her shoulders and the fear in her chest. She nodded slowly, unable to speak further, and moved toward the cabin. Inside, the warmth hit her like a physical force. The air was dry and smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. She shivered as she removed her wet coat, wrapping herself in the thick blankets he offered without a word. Her teeth chattered, her body trembling, as she sank into the chair by the fire. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. The man busied himself quietly around the cabin, tending to the fire, setting a kettle on the stove, and moving with the easy confidence of someone who lived here and knew every corner. He spoke little, but the few words he offered were kind and neutral, never probing, never judging.
"Sit there," he said softly, pointing to the chair closest to the fire.
You need to warm up. She obeyed, watching him from the corner of her eye. There was something solid about him, something steady that made her want to believe. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, not everyone expected something in return for kindness. Minutes passed, then more minutes, and she began to relax, just a little. The fire's warmth seeped into her frozen limbs, and her teeth stopped chattering. The kettle whistled softly, and the man poured her a hot drink. It smelled like cinnamon and hope. She took it with shaking hands, sipping slowly, feeling the heat move through her body. Breaths. I thank you, she said quietly, almost a whisper. He shrugged lightly. No need, he said. You're here. That's enough. It was simple yet powerful. Simple words, but they carried a promise. She would not be turned away.
"Not here. Not by him."
Outside, the storm continued, relentless and cruel. But inside the cabin, the world felt different.
She could breathe again. She could think again.
And for the first time in a long while, she did not feel completely alone. She watched him as he moved about the cabin, noticing the way he treated everything with care, stacking firewood, checking the kettle, arranging blankets. Perhaps. She realized that this was a man who understood hardship, who knew the value of survival, and yet still had the space in his heart to care for someone else. That thought was overwhelming. She had expected suspicion, maybe even rejection, but not this quiet, steady kindness. Her mind wandered back to the trail she had walked, to the empty snow-covered landscape she had left behind. She thought of the freezing wind, the icy ground, the hopeless feeling of being utterly alone. And now, in this cabin, with its warmth and light, she felt a tiny spark of something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. As night fell, the storm outside showed no signs of letting up. She sat wrapped in a blanket, staring into the fire, listening to the wind howl. The man moved around quietly, tending to the fire and ensuring she had everything she needed. He did not press her for information. He did not ask her story. He simply let her be, offering safety without intrusion. It was more than she had ever expected. Breath. And though she did not say it, she felt something shift inside her. A cautious trust, fragile and tentative but real. Perhaps not all people were harsh. Perhaps not everyone expected something in return for their help. For now, she could only focus on surviving the night. But deep down, she knew that this small act of kindness was the beginning of something important. Something that could change the way she saw the world. She was still afraid. She was still wary. But she was no longer completely alone. And in the quiet of the cabin, with snow piling up outside and the fire crackling softly, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could survive after all. The snowstorm had not slowed when morning came, though the world inside the cabin felt warm and safe in contrast. Sunlight filtered weakly through the frost-covered windows, casting pale patterns on the wooden floor. The Apache woman stirred under the thick blankets, her body finally recovering from the freezing night. She moved slowly, aware of every ache in her muscles, the stiffness in her limbs reminding her of how close she had come to danger. The cowboy was already awake, standing by the stove with a pot of hot coffee in his hand. He did not speak at first, merely nodding a quiet greeting as she emerged from the blankets. She felt a twinge of embarrassment at how bedraggled she must look, the dirt and snow still clinging to her hair and clothing. For a moment, she considered retreating back under the blankets, wishing she could disappear entirely. Instead, she stayed where she was, wrapped in a spare blanket he had offered. He gestured toward the table. "Dose." "Sit," he said simply. "Eat something. You need it." She hesitated, glancing at the plate of food he had prepared. Simple, hearty bread with a bit of jam, scrambled eggs and a cup of warm milk. She had not eaten since the day before, and the sight made her stomach tighten with hunger. Yet the shame of needing help lingered. She was used to fending for herself, surviving on scraps or what she could find. Asking for food, for warmth, felt unnatural, even humiliating. The cowboy waited patiently, not pressing, not judging. There was a quiet strength in him, a calm that seemed to radiate through the cabin. Slowly, she sat and picked up a piece of bread, breaking it in small pieces as she ate. The warmth of the food began to seep into her body, and for the first time in many hours, she felt a small sense of relief. She looked up at him, unsure what to say. "You don't have to talk," he said. "Just eat." It was simple, but it eased her tension slightly. She realized that he understood her fear, her hesitation, and he was not trying to push past it. She nodded silently, focusing on her meal. Each bite seemed to thaw her frozen nerves a little more. After she had eaten, he brought her a fresh set of clothes. Thick pants, a warm shirt, and a sturdy jacket. She was hesitant to change in front of him, but he gave her a simple, respectful gesture, turning to attend to the fire and giving her privacy. She changed quickly, the warmth of the clothes immediately comforting, as if the weight of the winter had lifted slightly from her body. Once she was dressed, she moved to the chair by the fire again, curling her hands around a warm mug he had poured for her. The warmth was soothing not just to her body, but to her spirit. For the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of peace, the kind that comes not from safety alone, but from being treated with genuine care. The cowboy moved quietly around the cabin, tending to chores. He stacked firewood neatly, checked the stove, and peered out the window at the snow-laden landscape. Occasionally, he glanced at her, making sure she was comfortable, but he never interrupted her silence. She realized that he understood the power of quiet. He did not need words to communicate care. His actions were enough. She watched him, curious about this man who had allowed her into his home without suspicion. There was a calmness about him, a confidence that did not intimidate, but rather reassured. She had met few people like him in her life. Most either demanded something in return or looked at her with pity. He had neither. That thought made her heart tighten in an unfamiliar way, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Hours passed. She did not speak much, and neither did he. Instead, they settled into a quiet rhythm. She helped with small chores, fetching firewood or sweeping the floor, but always under his gentle guidance. He did not criticize or scold, simply demonstrated what needed to be done and allowed her to follow. Slowly, she began to feel a connection. Not a romantic one, not yet, but a fragile thread of trust forming between them. The snowstorm outside intensified, making it impossible for her to leave even if she wanted to. At first, she considered sneaking away, worried that she would owe him something for his kindness. But the thought of stepping back into the freezing wilderness made her shiver violently. Here she was safe. She was warm. For the first time in many days, she was alive without fear of immediate danger. In the afternoon, he offered her a simple task, feeding the animals. She hesitated, unsure if she should intrude into his world, but he explained gently, "They're cold, too. They need food."
You can help. Together, they walked to the small barn where a few horses and a couple of cows waited.
Out, she marveled at how calm the animals were, sensing the cowboy's quiet authority and kindness. He handed her a bucket of feed and showed her how to scatter it evenly. The work was simple, yet it made her feel useful, her hands and body occupied in a way that brought comfort. As she fed the animals, he watched her from the doorway, a faint smile on his face. She noticed it and looked away quickly, embarrassed at being seen. But he did not tease or comment. His acceptance was quiet, steady, and unconditional. She began to understand that help could exist without manipulation, that kindness could be genuine, even if rare. After the animals were fed, they returned to the cabin. He set water to boil for tea, and she sat again by the fire, warming her hands. The storm continued outside, relentless and cold, but inside, the cabin felt like a small haven. The warmth, the light, and the quiet made her heart feel lighter than it had in weeks. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "The snow isn't letting up anytime soon, and it's safer here." She hesitated, a wave of fear and pride battling with the comfort she felt. "I can't stay forever," she said. "Bird, I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," he replied simply. "No one here thinks you are." "You need shelter. That's all that matters."
The simplicity of his words stunned her.
No hidden meanings, no expectations, just a truth she could understand and accept. She nodded slowly, allowing herself to relax fully for the first time. She realized that sometimes survival was not just about food or warmth. It was about trust. And here she was learning that trust could be offered without cost, a rare and precious thing. Evening fell, bringing longer shadows and a deeper cold outside. She sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket, while he tended to the stove and checked the firewood. Occasionally, he would glance at her, but never intrude, never demand. She began to feel a strange sense of belonging, though she knew she had only just arrived. Belonging, she realized, was not about possessions or titles. It was about feeling safe enough to simply exist. Her mind drifted to memories she had tried to forget. Times of hardship, moments of fear, nights spent shivering alone, wondering if anyone would ever care. But now, in this warm cabin, with the snow piling high outside and a man who had offered her nothing but kindness, she began to see that those memories did not have to define her. She could survive, she could endure, and perhaps she could even trust again. Night came fully, dark and silent, broken only by the occasional howl of the wind. She sat quietly, sipping her tea, listening to the fire crackle. The cowboy had already prepared a simple bed for her near the fireplace, blankets folded neatly, a small pillow waiting. She did not speak of it, but she appreciated the gesture deeply. As she lay down to sleep, she thought about the day, about the unexpected kindness, about the quiet strength of this man who had allowed her into his life without question.
She realized that safety was more than a roof over her head.
It was respect. It was patience. It was the freedom to simply exist without fear. And for her, that was more valuable than anything else in the world. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside she finally allowed herself to breathe. She did not know what the next day would bring, or whether she would eventually have to leave. But for now, she was safe. For now, she could rest. Narration. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she belonged, even if only for a little while. The snow had begun to soften, though patches of white still covered the hills and fields around the cabin. Inside, the Apache woman had begun to feel something unfamiliar. Stability. The warmth of the cabin, the quiet routines, and the cowboy's steady presence created a sense of safety she had not felt in years. Yet with comfort came unease. Her past had taught her that no kindness was free, that trust always had a price, and she could not shake the fear that something would go wrong. That morning she awoke to the smell of coffee and bread baking on the stove. She dressed quickly, pulling on the warm clothes the cowboy had lent her, and moved to the kitchen. He greeted her with a nod, holding out a mug of steaming coffee. The gesture was simple, unassuming, yet it carried a weight of reassurance she could not ignore. "You've been here a few days," he said quietly. "You need to keep your strength up, Brand. There's work to do today. Work!" The word made her tense. She had survived on the margins for years, moving from one temporary solution to the next. Work meant routine, responsibility, and perhaps the vulnerability of showing who she really was. Still, she nodded and took the mug. She could not hide from the reality of her body's needs, nor from the small seed of trust she was beginning to feel toward him. The day started with chores around the cabin and the barn. She helped feed the animals again, stacking hay and carrying buckets of water. Her movements were awkward at first, unfamiliar with the work, and wary of making mistakes. The cowboy observed quietly, correcting her gently when necessary, showing her how to lift heavy buckets without straining her back, how to scatter feed so the animals would eat evenly, and how to clean the stalls efficiently. As they worked side by side, she began to notice small things about him, how careful he was with the animals, how his hands moved with confidence and care, how he never seemed to rush. There was a rhythm to his movements, a quiet certainty that calmed her restless mind. He realized that he carried more than just physical strength. He carried a patience born of experience, a kind of wisdom she had not seen in many people. Yet, even as she began to feel more comfortable, her doubts lingered. She remembered moments from her past, people who had appeared kind, only to reveal selfish motives later. She could not shake the suspicion that this calm, strong man might expect something in return for his help. She had nothing to give, nothing but herself, and the thought of failing his expectations made her stomach tighten. During the afternoon, the weather forced them to stay inside the cabin for a while. Snowflakes tapped gently against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees outside. The woman sat by the fire, sipping tea, while the cowboy repaired a chair, quietly humming to himself. She watched him, noticing the subtle details, how carefully he sanded a rough edge, how focused he was on each motion. There was a grace in his work, a meticulousness that made her heart feel lighter. "You don't have to do everything," she said cautiously, breaking the silence. "I can help." He looked up, eyes meeting hers, calm and steady. "Bray, you already are helping," he said, "just by being here. That's enough." His words struck her unexpectedly. Enough, Raish. She had spent years feeling like she was never enough. Like every interaction required repayment, every act of kindness came with strings attached. And yet, here was someone saying she was enough simply for existing. She wanted to believe him, to accept that his words were true, but a part of her held back, afraid that trust could so easily be broken. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly, punctuated by small tasks and the occasional words. She helped him organize firewood, swept the floors, and refilled the animals' water buckets. Each task, simple as it was, began to build a subtle sense of accomplishment within her. She realized that this was more than survival. It was a chance to reclaim a sense of purpose she had long thought lost. Just as she began to relax fully, there was a knock at the cabin door. She froze, a cold wave of fear running through her. Visitors meant judgment, intrusion, or worse. She instinctively moved behind the cowboy, her body tense and wary. He opened the door cautiously, peering out at the traveler standing in the snow. A young man, bundled in heavy winter clothes, snow clinging to his boots, holding a small bag. He smiled politely. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "I'm just passing through and wondered if I could warm up for a moment." The Apache woman tensed further, stepping back. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, to disappear. She did not trust this stranger. She had survived long enough to know that appearances were not always what they seemed. The cowboy glanced at her, understanding in his gaze. "It's fine," he said calmly. "You can come in, pair. Just for a short while." The visitor nodded, stepping inside. The woman kept her distance, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, watching every movement. She felt her old fears rise. Someone new, someone unknown, could change everything. Her sense of safety, her fragile trust, could be lost in an instant. Grasp, yet, as the stranger settled near the fire, she noticed how carefully the cowboy moved. He offered warmth and tea, kept conversation neutral, and allowed space for both of them to coexist quietly. No one was pressured. No one forced to reveal more than they wished. The woman's tension began to ease slightly, though she remained cautious. Throughout the visit, she realized something important. Trust was not about guarantees. It was about observing actions, noticing consistency, and allowing oneself to accept that someone's kindness could be genuine. She had watched him care for the animals, prepare food, tend to the fire, and now treat a stranger with respect and patience. Perhaps trust did not need to be earned through repayment. Perhaps it could exist simply through consistent, thoughtful action. When the visitor finally left, thanking the cowboy for his hospitality, the woman felt a small sense of relief. The cowboy turned to her with a quiet smile. "Brass. See?" he said. "Nothing changed. You're still safe. Still welcome, Brass." She nodded slowly, the words sinking in. For the first time, she understood that safety and trust could coexist with uncertainty. She did not have to give anything to earn it, nor fear losing it with every new event. The simple act of consistency, of calm, steady care, was enough to build a foundation The evening brought more chores, more time by the fire, and small conversations between them. She learned a little about him, not in great detail, but enough to see that he had experienced loss, hardship, and loneliness, yet still chose to act with kindness. She realized that trust was a choice, and she could choose it if she allowed herself. By nightfall, she felt a subtle shift within herself. The fear that had gripped her for so long was not gone, but it had loosened its hold. She could sleep without the constant panic of the cold or danger, knowing that for now she was safe. Her mind drifted to thoughts of survival, of what it meant to exist in a world that often demanded repayment for every kindness. She realized that life could be different, that her past did not have to dictate her present breaths. She sat quietly by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, reflecting on the small victories of the day, helping with chores, observing the cowboys' patient care, surviving the snowstorm outside, and facing the arrival of a stranger without panic.
Each moment was a small act of courage, a subtle affirmation that she could endure, that she could trust, and that she could begin to believe in a future that was not dictated by fear alone.
As she prepared for bed that night, she noticed how the cabin had begun to feel like more than shelter. It was a place where she could exist without judgment, where her presence alone was enough, and where she could start to rebuild a sense of self she had long thought lost. The snow still blanketed the world outside, but inside, warmth and safety prevailed. She realized that trust was not a destination, but a journey, Britt. And tonight, after the trials of the day, she had taken a meaningful step forward. She had faced uncertainty, fear, and hesitation, and she had survived, with kindness guiding the way. Brace. And though the storm would continue outside, and though tomorrow might bring new challenges, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Hope! Hope that trust could exist! Britt. Hope that safety could be genuine. Hope that perhaps, in this quiet cabin in the snow, she could find a place where she truly belonged. Spring was slowly creeping into the hills around the cabin. The snow that had covered the fields for weeks had begun to melt, leaving patches of brown earth and green shoots pushing through the thawing ground. The Apache woman could hear the trickle of water from melted snow flowing into the small creek near the cabin. The sound was soothing, a soft, constant reminder that life moved forward even after harsh winters. Inside, the cabin felt warmer than ever, filled with the subtle smells of wood, coffee, and the faint scent of freshly washed clothes. The woman had begun to move more freely around the space, no longer tense or hesitant. She had established small routines, helping with the animals, carrying firewood, sweeping floors, and preparing simple meals alongside the cowboy. Each task had become part of a rhythm that grounded her and gave her a sense of purpose she had not known in years. She had also begun to notice the little details of the cowboy's life. The way he repaired tools meticulously, the careful way he stacked wood for the fire, the gentle way he spoke to the animals. These small observations built in her a quiet admiration not only for his skill but for his consistent kindness and patience. She realized that the foundation of trust they had built was strong and unwavering, and for the first time she began to feel that perhaps she could truly rely on someone without fear. One morning she stood outside feeding the horses as the sun rose, casting a warm golden light across the melting snow. The cowboy came to the barn quietly, holding 2 buckets of water. Breath. He placed one next to her and said softly, "You've gotten good at this. The animals respond to you."
She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face.
"I'm learning," she said. "It's easier when someone shows you patiently." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Inspiration. Patience helps, not just with animals but with people too. The words stayed with her, lingering in her mind. She realized he was speaking not just about the animals, but about her. about the care he had shown her when she had been cold, hungry, and afraid.
About the quiet way he had accepted her presence without judgment.
About the consistency of his actions, which had taught her that trust could exist without cost. As the day went on, they worked together on various chores around the property. But she helped mend a broken fence, carried hay for the animals, and even helped plant a small vegetable patch near the cabin. Each action, no matter how small, gave her a sense of accomplishment. She felt useful, capable, and alive in a way she had not felt in a long time. In the afternoon, she took a moment to sit by the fire with a mug of tea. The cowboy was nearby, repairing a saddle that had worn leather straps. She watched him work, noticing the careful precision of his hands, the quiet confidence in his movements, and the calm focus in his eyes. The sight filled her with a sense of admiration and unexpectedly gratitude that ran deeper than she had realized. "You've taught me a lot," she said softly, almost as if testing the words in the air. "Ah." He looked up, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Have I?" "Yes," she said, her voice firmer now.
About trust, about patience.
About not everything in the world being dangerous. He nodded slowly, accepting her words without comment, but the faint smile on his lips was enough acknowledgement.
Braffs. She realized that she had changed too. The fear and suspicion that had gripped her for so long were slowly loosening. She could imagine a future that included safety, kindness, and even a sense of belonging. Evening fell, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. They had finished feeding the animals and tidying the cabin. The woman stood outside for a moment, breathing in the crisp spring air, noticing the buds beginning to form on the trees. Life was returning to the land, and somehow she felt life returning to her too. "Come inside," the cowboy called gently.
It's getting chilly. She nodded, moving inside and wrapped herself in a blanket by the fire.
The warmth seeped into her bones, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the comfort fully. Over the following weeks, her presence became a natural part of the ranch. She helped with chores without hesitation, learned to tend to the animals confidently, and even assisted in minor repairs around the cabin. She began to feel not only useful but respected, valued, and accepted for who she was, not for what she could give, but simply for existing. The cowboy continued his quiet guidance, never demanding anything of her beyond what she was willing to give. He did not push, did not question unnecessarily, and never judged her for her past. His consistent kindness became a foundation on which she could rebuild herself. Piece by piece, she began to believe in herself again, realizing that her past did not define her future. One afternoon, as the sun shone warmly on the melting snow, she sat on the porch with a small basket of vegetables from the garden. The cowboy joined her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the animals graze in the field and the snow retreat from the hills. "You've come a long way," he said softly. She nodded, a smile touching her lips. "I have. And it's because you gave me a chance, without asking for anything in return."
His eyes steady.
Everyone deserves a chance. Sometimes people just need a little patience and care.
The words sank deeply into her heart. She realized that she had been given something far greater than food or shelter. But she had been given trust, acceptance, and the freedom to exist without fear or shame. And in return, she had given herself, a self she was learning to value and respect. Days turned into weeks, and the seasons began to change fully. Spring brought green grass, blooming flowers, and longer days. The cabin, once a temporary refuge, became a home filled with warmth, life, and laughter. She had begun to laugh again, quietly at first, then more freely, sharing moments of lightness with the cowboy who had saved her without knowing it. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the freezing nights she had wandered into the storm, the fear that had gripped her, and the loneliness that had defined her life. And now she felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. A real hope. The kind that comes not from luck or circumstance, but from the steady, consistent care of someone who sees your worth without needing you to prove it. The cowboy looked at her, his gaze calm and reassuring. "You're different now," he said quietly. "Stronger, confident. You've survived more than you know." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle inside her.
I am,
she admitted softly.
and I feel like I belong here. He smiled faintly, not with pride, but with understanding.
You do. You always did.
You just needed a little time to see it. For the first time, she truly believed it.
She belonged here, not because she had anything to give, not because she had proven herself, but simply because she existed, because she had survived, and because she had learned to trust again. The cabin, the ranch, the animals, and the quiet cowboy who had given her refuge had become her world, a place of safety and hope. As night fell, she prepared for bed, the fire crackling softly beside her breath. She reflected on her journey from the snow-covered trail where she had wandered lost and alone to the warm cabin where she had discovered trust, patience, and acceptance. She had faced fear, hunger, cold, and uncertainty, and she had endured. And now she realized that survival was no longer her only goal. She could dream, hope, and plan. She could imagine a future filled with warmth, safety, and perhaps even joy. The snow had melted from the fields, but more importantly, it had melted from her heart. She felt alive again, ready to embrace life fully, without fear or hesitation. Round the stars twinkled in the clear night sky. The creek flowed gently from the melting snow, a constant reminder that life moves forward. Inside, the fire continued to burn, casting a warm glow on the cabin walls. She lay down on the small bed, blankets tucked around her, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. But she closed her eyes, allowing herself to sleep without fear. Tomorrow would bring more chores, more work, and more lessons. But she was ready. She had learned that trust could exist, that kindness could be genuine, and that she could belong somewhere, even when she had nothing to offer but herself. And as she drifted into sleep, a sense of peace settled over her. The cabin was no longer just a refuge, it was a home. The cowboy was no longer just a stranger, he was a steady presence in her life, a guide and a symbol of hope. And she, once lost in the cold and fear, was now strong, confident, and ready to embrace the life she had found for the first time in a long time. She smiled in her sleep, knowing that she had not just survived, she had begun to live.